Today we'll explore the characters with the most tragic backstories, uncovering the pain, loss, and struggles that shaped them into who they are today. So grab your tissues and let's get started. First up, we have to talk about Tomura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains. At first glance, Shigaraki might seem evil down to the core, but this wasn't always the case. Tomura's real name is actually Tenko Shimura, and he came from a family with a proud lineage, as his grandmother, Nana Shimura, was a renowned hero and a former wielder of One for All. However, Tenko's family life was far from perfect. His father was constantly verbally and physically abusing him, especially whenever the topic of heroes came up, which is tough for Tenko, who deeply admired heroes. Meanwhile, his mother was emotionally distant, leaving Tenko feeling isolated and unloved. Everything then took a turn for the worst after Tenko was punished by his father and had to stay in the backyard. While outside, Tenko, crying inconsolably, confided to the family dog of how he couldn't take any more of the abuse and how he hated everyone for leaving him to suffer at the hands of his father. This is when his quirk decay manifested. The first victim of this devastating quirk was the family dog. The next victim was his sister, and he eventually ends up annihilating his entire family, disintegrating them before his eyes. However, his father, Kotaro, was the last family member alive, and instead of helping his son who was begging him for help, Kotaro grabbed a pair of pruning shears, which he then used to hit his son across the face before yelling at him to stop. This time, an enraged Tenko charged at his father with full intent to kill him, and touched his face, ultimately spreading the decay and ending up destroying the entire house. After the deaths of his family, an orphaned Tenko was left to fend for himself on the streets. Tenko wandered around the city dazed and confused, mentally pleading for someone to help him. People who passed by took one look and pretended not to notice him, unnerved by his scary appearance. Utterly devastated, he's easy prey for All for One, who takes him under his wing to raise Tenko to replace him, manipulating Tenko's hatred towards society and heroes, encouraging his descent into villainy. All for One later told Tenko that he was reborn as Tomura Shigaraki, while he is wearing the hands of his deceased family members, as he always wants to take his family with him. So, can anyone really blame Tomura for turning into a villain after this truly tragic backstory? Now, let's talk about Eri, who is the granddaughter of the boss of a criminal Yakuza group. After accidentally using her newly manifested quirk on her father, causing him to vanish, her mother, believing her existence was cursed, gave her up. Eri was then placed under the care of Kai Chisaki, her grandfather's protege, who initially misdiagnosed her quirk as Vanish. Upon discovering that her true quirk was Rewind, he saw her potential as a weapon for the Yakuza's resurgence. To prevent her grandfather from interfering, Kai used his Overhaul quirk to incapacitate him. After taking control of the organization, Kai subjected Eri to brutal experiments to harness her quirk, which involved repeatedly injuring her and collecting her blood, which had the ability to suppress others' quirks. Despite Eri's attempts to escape and resist, she ultimately resigned to her fate as a prisoner. However, she luckily ran into Deku, which led to her not having to spend her whole childhood suffering from Overhaul's control, as she was rescued by a large group of pro-heroes and taken to live at UA. Next, we have Toya Todoroki, also known as Dabi, whose tragic backstory revolves around his father, Eijiro Todoroki, also known as the Flame Hero Endeavor. Obsessed with surpassing the #1 pro-hero All Might, Enji arranged a quirk marriage with Rei Himura to produce a child capable of inheriting both fire and ice abilities. Their first son, Toya Todoroki, was born with a more powerful fire quirk than Endeavor himself, but he lacked the frost quirk to safely control his fire quirk, leading to severe burns every time he activated his abilities. As Toya's hair changed from red to white, Enji deemed him a failure and ceased training him to stop him from hurting himself, but this only pushed Toya to pursue training on his own despite the dangers. As Enji and Rei had more children, including Shoto, who inherited a perfect combination of their quirks, Toya's despair deepened. He felt abandoned and unloved, especially as his father only focused on Shoto's training. One fateful day, after his father failed to show up for a training session as Toya wanted to show him his control over his fire quirk, Toya lost control of his flames, causing a massive wildfire that was believed to have incinerated him. However, Toya survived after jumping into a lake to extinguish his flames. Rescued by All for One, he remained in a coma for 3 years. Upon waking, he learned that his body was severely damaged and could no longer use his quirk. Devastated and angry, he rejected All for One's attempts to train him and escaped, only to find his family had moved on, believing he was dead. This realization fueled his transformation into Dabi, a villain determined to ruin Endeavor's life. With a new identity, he embraced his status as a failure and plotted revenge against the father who had neglected him, solidifying his resolve to destroy Endeavor's hero career. After talking about Dabi, we have to talk about Shoto's tragic backstory. Shoto was born with the desired dual flame and frost quirks. Because of this, Endeavor saw him as the future #1 hero who would finally surpass All Might. So as a child, Shoto was subjected to harsh training by Enji, who pushed him to his limits, often ignoring his mother Rei's protests and even resorting to abuse. Enji separated Shoto from his siblings, preventing him from forming bonds with them. Despite this, Rei encouraged Shoto to embrace his powers and become a hero, emphasizing that he was not bound by his lineage. But the family dynamic grew increasingly toxic, with Enji's abusive behavior causing Rei to break down and ultimately injure Shoto during an episode of distress, leading to a severe burn on the left side of his face. Following this incident, Shoto began to blame Enji for the family's dysfunction and rejected his father's aspirations for him. After Toya's apparent death, Enji intensified his training regimen, leaving Shoto feeling cold and distant, ultimately leading him to reject his father's legacy entirely. This traumatic upbringing significantly impacted Shoto's relationships and emotional well-being, driving his desire to distance himself from Enji's oppressive influence. Keigo Takami, also known as Hawks, the #2 pro hero, was born in Fukuoka under troubled circumstances. His mother, Tomi, harbored his father after he committed murder, leading to a traumatic and abusive childhood for Keigo. The floor of Keigo's childhood home was shown to be littered with garbage, broken shards, and alcohol bottles, and Keigo himself was portrayed as an expressionless, quiet child. He was isolated at home to prevent him from exposing his father's crimes. Despite his limited interactions, Keigo developed a fascination with heroes, believing them to be fictional characters. One day, feeling a strange sensation in his feathers, he ventured outside but returned home to face his father's wrath, who suspected him of betrayal. After enduring physical and emotional abuse, Keigo's life changed drastically when his father was arrested by Endeavor, the hero he idolized. This shocking realization made Keigo understand that heroes were real and led to him and his mother fleeing out of fear of being arrested for harboring a fugitive. Living on the streets without proper means of survival, Keigo was driven to prove his worth after his mother's harsh words questioning his existence. He heroically saved lives during a car accident, which caught the attention of the Hero Public Safety Commission. They offered him and his mother compensation and protection, provided they abandoned their last name. After separating from his mother, Keigo underwent rigorous training to become a hero, mastering deception and infiltration to fulfill his dream of becoming a hero like Endeavor. Next, we have Jin Bubai, later known as Twice, who lost both of his parents in a villain attack during middle school, leaving him an orphan without any family to adopt him. He found temporary shelter and food with a kind employer. However, his life took another turn when he accidentally hit a pedestrian with his motorbike, resulting in a broken arm for the victim. Although the police cleared him of wrongdoing, the victim was connected to a longtime customer of his boss, who then fired and evicted Jin, leaving him homeless. Overwhelmed by loneliness and depression, Jin began to use his quirk, which allows him to create duplicates of himself, to cope by creating friends. Initially, he made a single copy, but as he produced more duplicates, he resorted to using them to commit crimes for survival, including armed robberies. His ability to create an unlimited number of clones led him to become one of Japan's most wanted criminals. As time passed, Jin's clones, sharing his personality traits, began to grow lazy and revolted against him. In a violent conflict that lasted 9 days, the clones battled over who was the true Jin, ultimately resulting in all but one clone's death. This experience left Jin grappling with his identity and whether he was even the original. Later, Jin, disguised with a paper bag over his head, met Giran, who recognized the potential of his quirk. Giran suggested that there were many others like Jin and encouraged him to join a group of comrades, promising to introduce him to a community where he could find belonging and purpose. Now, let's talk about Himiko Toga, whose story is marked by tragedy and rejection. Born into a family that found her fascination with blood disturbing, Himiko's parents were horrified when she displayed morbid behavior from a young age. After bringing a bloodied bird to her parents and cheerfully calling it pretty, they accused her of killing it and were disgusted by her tendencies. In an effort to force her to be normal, her parents sent her to quirk counseling and pressured her to suppress her deviant behavior. Himiko eventually learned to hide her urges and acted as the ideal schoolgirl, gaining friends and appearing normal on the surface. However, her fascination with blood and violence continued, leading to social problems. After drinking a friend's blood, her parents confronted her, but Himiko, confused and hurt, couldn't understand why her desires were wrong. Her parents, at their wits' end, called her inhuman, driving her into despair. In middle school, Himiko developed a crush on a boy named Saito after seeing him covered in blood during a fight. Her suppressed feelings resurfaced, and in an attempt to express her twisted affection, she attacked him with a box cutter, sucking his blood through a straw while crying. After this assault, she went into hiding as a wanted criminal, and her parents publicly disowned her, calling her a demon. Himiko eventually became a suspect in several murders and, evading capture, joined the League of Villains, where she fully embraced her dark desires. Next, we have the first user of One for All, Yoichi Shigaraki, the brother of the heinous villain All for One. Yoichi and his brother were born to a mother who died during childbirth due to the older twin, possessing a meta ability, later known as quirks, consumed most of her life force. The elder brother, who had a quirk that allowed him to steal other quirks, took his mother's power, leaving him and his younger brother, Yoichi, to grow up as orphans. The brothers relied on each other as they lived as street urchins during a time when quirks were still largely unknown. The elder brother grew increasingly power-hungry, using his ability to kill and steal quirks from others. Despite his cruelty, he kept Yoichi close, treating him as a possession. Meanwhile, Yoichi hoped his brother still had some good in him, inspired by their shared love of hero comics. As quirks became more widespread, the elder brother, who later adopted the name All for One, sought to build a world where he ruled like the villainous demon lord from their comics. He amassed power and followers by taking quirks and manipulating people, becoming a tyrant in Japan. Despite Yoichi's attempts to stop him, his lack of a quirk and frail body left him powerless to oppose his brother's atrocities. All for One, still attached to Yoichi, imprisoned him instead of killing him. He frequently visited him, bragging about his success, but Yoichi remained defiant. In a twisted display of affection, All for One implanted a power stockpiling quirk in Yoichi, not knowing Yoichi already had a quirk, Bestowal. The two quirks merged to form the powerful One for All. Yoichi was later rescued by vigilantes, but his brother tracked them down and killed him. However, Yoichi's will and the One for All quirk were passed down to future generations, with the hope that one day it would become powerful enough to defeat All for One. Kota Izumi, the son of the pro-hero duo Waterhose, was a very happy child who deeply loved his parents. However, he was left alone after his parents sacrificed themselves to save civilians from the villain Muscular. Believing they died a truly heroic death, many supporters praised the hero duo. Kota, however, was devastated by their deaths. Kota believed that his parents chose their work over him and developed a twisted view of the world of heroes. Kota also became a reserved, cold, and grumpy misanthrope. Kota, who is the nephew of Shino Sosasuke, also known as Mandalay, was taken in by the hero team Wild Wild Pussycats. Despite despising heroes, Kota listens to his relative and assists the Pussycats because he has nowhere else to go. However, everything changes for him after Class 1A comes to train with the Wild Wild Pussycats, as Deku ultimately rescues him and defeats the villain who killed his parents. Showing how heroes put someone else's life before their own, and Kota was finally able to see why his parents died and move past his hateful disposition. Kota has also slowly begun to open himself up to others, though he is still rather indifferent and prideful. Finally, let's talk about Izuku Midoriya. Izuku's backstory might not be as dramatically awful as some of the characters on this list, but he still has had it rough. Izuku was a quirkless child living in a society where quirks were everything. He was considered a worthless failure, inferior to everyone else because of this, ever since he was only 4 years old, which makes his dreams of becoming a professional hero like his idol All Might feel all but impossible. He also said himself that all men are not created equal. What's more, his childhood friend Bakugo constantly bullies him. This is ostensibly due to Izuku's lack of a quirk, but it's really more about Bakugo's own feelings of inferiority. Izuku was called worthless and was even told to commit suicide, not to mention the adults around him encouraging the behavior as they did nothing to stop the bullying. Although Izuku was always an incredibly kind person, it must deeply hurt to always be told that you are worthless and consistently being bullied. And that wraps up our dive into the tragic backstories of some of the most compelling characters in My Hero Academia. From Shigaraki's painful descent into villainy to Eri's heartbreaking imprisonment, these stories remind us that even the most powerful heroes and villains are shaped by their past. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world of My Hero Academia. Which character's backstory hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.